My daughter stopped hugging me when she turned 16. My wife said it was just a phase. Girls pull away from their fathers. Then I found the letters my daughter had written but never sent. She wasn't pulling away from me. She was afraid of me. Afraid of something her mother had spent 10 years quietly teaching her I had done. None of it was true. And the statement they had typed up in her name, the one meant to take her from me for good, my little girl never even wrote it. I have spent 30 years of my life standing in the dark, waiting for the truth to appear. That's not a metaphor, or at least, it didn't used to be. I'm a photographer. For most of my adult life, I've made my living in a dark room no bigger than a closet, under a red safe light, rocking a tray of chemicals back and forth while an image I couldn't yet see swam up slowly out of blank white paper. There is a specific kind of patience that job teaches you. You learn that the picture is already there, latent, hiding in the silver before you ever drop it in the developer. You're not creating anything. You're only revealing what was true the whole time. I used to find that comforting. I don't anymore. Because I've since learned that anyone standing in that same darkness, with the same hands, can decide exactly how much of the truth you're ever allowed to see. My name is Michael. I'm 51 years old. And until about 4 months ago, I believed I understood my own family the way I understood my craft. Completely, in my bones, without having to think about it. I shot weddings on weekends and portraits during the week, and 2 mornings a week I taught a photography class down at the community college, mostly to retirees and kids who liked the idea of an old-fashioned camera. I spent my whole life freezing other people's happiest moments. First kisses, newborns, 50th anniversaries, and printing them so they'd last forever. It never once occurred to me that while I was busy preserving everyone else's memories, someone in my own house was very carefully editing mine. Let me tell you who we were, because you can't understand what I found in those letters until you understand how ordinary and how safe my life felt right up until the second it didn't. I married Rachel 23 years ago. She was a pediatric nurse, and I want you to really hear that, because it matters to everything that came later. She was the woman other parents wished they had. She sat on the floor of the ER with terrified 5-year-olds and made them laugh through their tears. She remembered every neighbor's kid's birthday. She brought soup to sick co-workers. When people described Rachel, the word they reached for again and again was gentle. I believed that word all the way down. I'd have staked my life on it. In a way, I nearly did. We had one child, Emma. And God, when Emma was small, she was mine. I know every parent says that, but there was a season of my life, roughly ages 2 through 6, where that little girl would not let go of me. She fell asleep on my chest during ball games. She rode on my shoulders through the county fair with her sticky hands wrapped in my hair. She used to come into my dark room, the one place in the house that was mine, and sit on an overturned bucket in the red glow, absolutely silent, watching the pictures rise up out of nothing like it was the greatest magic trick ever performed. "Do it again, Daddy," she'd whisper. "Make another one come." I have hundreds of photographs of her from those years. I've looked at every single one of them 1,000 times since, searching them like crime scenes, trying to find the exact frame where I started to lose her, because somewhere in there, so slowly I never felt the ground shift. I did. It wasn't a door slamming. That's what I need you to understand, especially if you're listening tonight and something about this is already making your stomach tighten. It was nothing you could point to. A hug that got a half-second shorter, then a hug with a stiff arm in it. Then the shoulder turn, where she'd angle her body away so my kiss landed on the side of her head instead of her cheek. By the time she was 16, my daughter could cross an entire room to avoid walking past my chair, and she did it so smoothly, so automatically, that it looked like nothing at all. I finally said something. I remember it was a Sunday, and I'd reached out to hug her goodbye before she left for a friend's house, and she flinched. Not a big, dramatic flinch, just a small, whole-body recoil, the kind you can't fake and can't fully hide, the kind an animal makes when a hand comes too close. And it broke something in me. That night I sat on the edge of our bed and I told Rachel I thought Emma hated me, and my voice cracked in a way it hadn't since I was a boy. Rachel put her warm hand on the back of my neck, the way she'd done 10,000 times, and she gave me the softest, saddest smile. And she said the words I would replay in my head for months afterward, searching them for the lie I couldn't yet hear. "Oh, Michael, it's just a phase. Girls pull away from their fathers at this age. It's normal. Give her space. She'll come back to you." I believed her. Of course I believed her. She was the gentle one. She was the nurse. She'd never given me a single reason in 23 years not to. That was the first photograph she ever handed me that had been quietly, expertly altered. It would be a long time before I learned to see the seams. For the next 2 years, I did exactly what she told me to do. I gave Emma space. I want to sit in that with you for a second because it's one of the cruelest parts of this whole thing, looking back. The advice sounded like love. Give her room. Don't crowd her. Let her come to you. And so, believing I was being a good and patient father, I slowly, obediently backed out of my own daughter's life. Every instinct I had screamed at me to lean in, to fight for her, to sit outside her door if I had to. And every time, that gentle voice in my head said the same thing. Don't push. You'll only make it worse. Give her space. I've thought a lot since then about how the best lies don't sound like lies at all. They sound like patience. They sound like maturity. They sound like the reasonable, loving thing that only a selfish man would argue with. The distance kept growing, and it kept changing shape. When Emma was around 14, she started locking her bedroom door. Not just closing it, locking it, with a little privacy latch Rachel had bought and installed herself, so she can feel like she has her own space. When I knocked to say goodnight, there'd be a pause, a beat too long, before her voice came through the wood, flat and careful. Night. Just that, never Dad. Then the names started. One evening at dinner, she asked me to pass the salt and she called me Michael, just slipped out like I was a stepfather or a man boarding in the spare room. She caught herself and mumbled, "Dad," a half second later, and her eyes flicked. I saw it, I'll never forget it. Her eyes flicked sideways to her mother, fast, like a kid checking whether she'd gotten a line wrong. At the time, I told myself I imagined it. I was very, very good at telling myself things by then. I'd had years of practice. Around the same time, Emma started asking to go to boarding school, a performing arts academy 3 hours away. She was suddenly desperate for it, and Rachel was suddenly, tearfully supportive of it. And the two of them would sit at the kitchen table with the glossy brochure between them, heads bent together, and when I walked in the room, the conversation would smooth over into nothing, the way water closes over a dropped stone. I remember standing in the doorway of my own kitchen feeling, absurdly, like I'd interrupted something, like I was the outsider in my own house. I didn't have the language for that feeling yet. Now I do. The word is excluded, and it had been happening, carefully and continuously, for a decade. Here's the part I'm least proud of. I started to wonder if it was me. If you've ever been slowly convinced that you're the problem, that the strange, sourceless dread you feel is your own defect and not a signal about the world around you, then you already know the particular vertigo I'm describing. I began reviewing myself like evidence. Had I yelled once when she was little and forgotten it? Had I been too gruff, too distant, too wrapped up in work? I actually went out to my dark room one night, pulled boxes of old prints off the shelf, and sat on the concrete floor going through pictures of my own daughter, looking for proof that I was a bad father. Think about that. I was gathering exhibits against myself, and I didn't even know there was already a case being built. A real one, with dates and typed pages, sitting 2 rooms away above my head. I want to stop here and say something directly to whoever needs it tonight. That feeling, the one where your gut has known something is wrong for months before your mind will let you say it out loud. That feeling is not paranoia. It is not you being dramatic or insecure or a bad spouse for having suspicions. Very often, it is the smartest, oldest part of you standing guard, trying to hand you a truth your heart isn't ready to hold yet. I ignored mine for years. Please don't ignore yours. The first real crack, the first thing I couldn't explain away, couldn't develop into an innocent picture no matter how I tried, came on a Tuesday in October. Emma had gone to school. I went into her room to leave a stack of clean laundry on her bed, something I did all the time, and a spiral notebook had slid halfway off her desk onto the floor. I bent to pick it up. I wasn't reading it. I want that on the record for whatever it's worth. I would have set it back without a glance, but it had fallen open, face up. And one line was just there, in my daughter's round handwriting. Impossible not to see. I get scared when it's only me and him in the house. I never tell Mom how bad it gets. I read it 4 or 5 times, standing there. Him, in the house, scared. My mind kept trying to make it mean something else. A boy at school, a character in a story she was writing, anything. But I knew. Some cold, sick, certain part of me knew that him was me. That my own daughter had written, in her private notebook, that she was afraid to be alone with her own father. I did not confront her. I did not confront Rachel. I set the notebook back exactly where it had fallen, at exactly the angle it had fallen, the way I'd learned as a boy to put things back so my own mother wouldn't know I'd been in her room. My hands were steady. That's the thing I remember most. My hands were completely steady, the way they always got right before a difficult exposure, when everything in me went quiet and cold and focused, because I finally understood I wasn't looking at a phase. I was looking at a picture someone had spent years developing, and I needed to see the whole thing before I let anyone know I'd walked into the darkroom. It took me 9 days to find the rest of the picture, and I found it the way you find most terrible things, by looking for something ordinary and stumbling into the truth sideways. I've never been an impulsive man. 30 years in a darkroom breeds a certain discipline into you, because chemistry doesn't forgive panic. Push the process, rush the timing, let your hands shake, and you ruin the very thing you were trying to save. So I didn't tear the house apart the way part of me wanted to. I waited. I watched. I told myself I needed to understand the shape of it before I moved. And that was true. But I'll be honest with you. I was also just afraid. Some part of me knew that once I saw the whole image, I could never unsee it, and I'd be a different man on the other side of it. I was right about that. What I told myself I was doing that Saturday was looking for Emma's old baby things. Rachel had taken Emma to a college visit 3 hours away, and overnight, and the house was mine and silent. I climbed up into the attic under the pretense of finding a box of Emma's toddler photos for a project. That was the lie I told myself, and I almost believe it still. But my feet carried me straight to the row of storage boxes along the far wall, and my eyes went straight to one in particular, because I'd seen Rachel carry it up there more than once over the years. Always alone, always when she thought I was out. It was labeled, in Rachel's neat nurse's handwriting, Emma, keepsakes. That's the detail that still takes the wind out of me. She hid it inside our daughter's name. She hid it inside the most innocent, sacred, untouchable label a mother could write. Because she knew me, that a keepsake box was the one thing in that whole attic I would never open. Why would I? What kind of man rifles through his own child's saved memories? She built her hiding place out of my decency. That is how well she understood the man she was doing this to. I opened it. On top, for the first few inches, it was exactly what the label promised. A hospital bracelet, a lock of pale hair in a plastic bag, a tiny knit hat. My throat closed up looking at them, and for a second I almost put the lid back on, ashamed. Then my fingers hit something underneath the soft things. A hard, flat bundle. I lifted out the baby blanket, and beneath it was a shoebox. And inside the shoebox was a stack of folded papers. Some notebook pages, some torn from a diary, a few on stationery, dozens of them, held together with a rubber band gone brittle with age. They were letters, in Emma's handwriting, written across years. You could watch the handwriting itself grow up, from the big round loops of a little girl to the tight, guarded script of a teenager. Every one of them was addressed to me, and not one of them had ever been sent, because they were never meant to be sent. They were the place my daughter had been putting the things she was too frightened to say out loud. I sat down on a dusty rafter beam under a bare bulb, and I read my child's secret heart. And I want to tell you what was in those pages, because I think you need to understand exactly what was done to her. The early ones broke me with their confusion. "Dear Daddy," one of them read, in careful 9-year-old print. "Why do you get so mad? Mummy says you don't mean it, but I saw your face that time. I don't want you to hurt Mummy anymore. I'll be really good so you won't." There had been no time. There was no that time. There was nothing. No fight, no raised hand, no night I lost my temper. I searched my memory until it bled, and there was simply nothing there, because it never happened. But my daughter, at 9 years old, was apologizing to me in a letter she'd never send, promising to be good so I wouldn't hurt her mother. The later ones were worse, because they'd hardened. "Dear Michael," one of them said. Michael, not Dad. "I know what you are, even if everybody at church thinks you're so nice. Mum told me why we can never really relax when you're home. I'm counting the days until I can leave and never be scared again." And then the one that I still can't read without having to stop and breathe. "I get scared when it's just me and him." Mom says she spent her whole life protecting me from the parts of you nobody else gets to see. I believe her. I'll always believe her. I'll always believe her. 10 years. Drip by drip, year after year, a single sentence at a time, whispered at bedtime and in the car, and across that kitchen table when I wasn't in the room. I thought about my own trade, and the word rose up in my mind and wouldn't leave. Fixer. In the dark room, the developer brings the image up, but it's the fixer that makes it permanent, that washes away everything still sensitive to change and locks the picture into place forever, so that no amount of light will ever alter it again. Rachel had spent a decade developing a false image of me in our daughter's mind, and somewhere along the way, patiently, lovingly, she had fixed it, made it permanent, made it the truth Emma would carry for the rest of her life. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough that the attic went from warm to cold. And then, because I am who I am, because I needed to see the whole exposure, I dug down to the very bottom of that box. And beneath the letters, beneath my daughter's grief, I found Rachel's. Not grief. Records. A thick accordion folder, the kind I use to organize contracts. And inside, in her tidy clinical hand and in cold printed pages, was a log. Dated entries going back 9 years. March 12th. M raised his voice at dinner, E present, visibly upset. August 3rd. M grabbed my arm in the kitchen. November. E asked why Daddy scares me, reassured her it's not her fault. Incident after incident after incident, every one of them a lie. Every one of them dated, detailed, and clearly, unmistakably being saved. Building toward something. It wasn't a diary. I understood that with a chill that went all the way to the floor of me. A diary is where you put the truth. This was a case file. She wasn't remembering our marriage. She was documenting a crime I had never committed, for a day she already knew was coming. I put every page back exactly where I found it. I photographed each one first, with the same steady hands that had printed 1,000 wedding albums. Then I climbed down out of that attic, walked into my dark room, sat in the red dark where my daughter used to watch the magic happen, and I picked up the phone to call the one person who had tried to warn me 3 years ago. The sister I hadn't spoken to since. I need to tell you about my sister Claire, and about the worst thing I ever said to her, because I can't tell this story honestly without it. Claire is 2 years younger than me, a labor and delivery nurse, which meant she and Rachel had always spoken the same language. Hospitals, charts, the particular gallows humor of people who've held other people's worst days in their hands. For most of our lives, Claire and I were close in that easy sibling way, where you don't call much, but you'd give a kidney without being asked. And then, 3 years ago, at a 4th of July cookout in her backyard, she pulled me aside by the coolers and said something that ended all of that. She said, "Michael, I need you to hear me, and I need you not to get defensive. I think Rachel is turning Emma against you, on purpose. I've watched it for years. The little comments, the way she gets between you two, the way that kid looks at her mom before she's allowed to feel anything about you. That's not normal. That's not a phase. I think it's deliberate, and I think it's getting worse." And I told my sister she was jealous. I told her she'd never been married, never had kids, and had no business projecting her loneliness onto a family that worked. I told her Rachel was the most loving mother she'd ever meet, and that Claire should be ashamed of herself. I remember the exact look on her face. Not angry, just deeply, quietly sad. The look of someone watching a person they love walk cheerfully toward a cliff. She said, "Okay, Michael, I hope I'm wrong. I really do." And we barely spoke for 3 years. If you're listening tonight, and someone in your life has ever tried to tell you a hard truth, a truth that would have cost you your comfortable version of things, and you punished them for it instead of thanking them, then you know the specific acid shame I felt dialing her number that night in my dark room. Because she hadn't been jealous. She'd been the only person in my entire life who saw the picture clearly while it was still developing. And I'd called her bitter and shut the door. She picked up on the 4th ring, wary. "Michael?" "Claire," I said, and my voice came apart on her name. "You were right. 3 years ago. You were right about all of it, and I called you jealous, and I am so sorry. And I need your help, and I know I have absolutely no right to ask." There was a long silence. I could hear her breathing. Then, very quietly, she said, "Tell me what you found." So I told her. The flinch, the notebook, the letters in the keepsake box, in Emma's handwriting, apologizing for things I'd never done. The log with its dated entries, my name attached to a decade of invented cruelty. I heard my unshakable sister start to cry somewhere around the 3rd letter. And when I finished, there was another long pause. And then she said something that stopped my heart. "Michael, I kept things." "What?" "Emails, a couple of texts. There was one, about 2 years ago. Rachel meant to send it to her mother, and it came to me by mistake, wrong contact. It was about you. About the plan, she called it. About making sure Emma would never have doubts by the time it mattered. I didn't understand what it meant then, and you'd already told me I was crazy, so I screenshotted it and I saved it. I don't know why. I think part of me knew someday you'd call. I sat down hard on the dark room stool. My sister had been holding a piece of the negative for 2 years, waiting in the dark with me, and I never knew it. "There's someone you need to talk to," Claire said. "A woman I know through work. Dr. Susan Okafor. She's a forensic psychologist. She does custody evaluations, and she specializes in exactly this. It even has a name, Michael. What you're describing. It has a name." I met Dr. Okafor 4 days later, in a quiet office with soft chairs and a box of tissues placed, I noticed, within reach of every seat. She was a calm, unhurried woman in her 60s, who listened to my entire account without once interrupting, and who looked at the photographs of Rachel's log for a long time in silence before she set them down. "What you're describing," she said finally, "has a name. It's called parental alienation. And I want to be careful with you, Michael, because it's a term that gets thrown around carelessly in ugly divorces by parents who are just angry. That's not what this is. What you've brought me, a documented campaign spanning a decade, a fabricated behavioral record, a child expressing fear with no corroborating incident anywhere. This is at the severe end of a spectrum that the psychological field recognizes as a genuine form of emotional child abuse. Your daughter is a victim here. I need you to hold on to that, because you're going to be tempted to be angry at her, and she is the most injured person in this entire story." I asked her the question I'd been carrying up out of that attic. Why? Why would a mother do this to her own daughter? What does she get? Dr. Okafor was quiet for a moment. "Usually control. Sometimes it's the opening move in a custody war. You spend years making the child terrified of one parent, and then when you finally file, the child independently refuses contact, and no judge in the country will force her. It looks organic. It looks like the child's own choice. That's the genius of it, and the horror of it." She tapped the photos. "And Michael, this level of patience, this discipline over 10 years? In my experience, this doesn't come from one wounded, angry mother improvising. This is a playbook. Somebody taught her this. Somewhere in her life, someone showed her that this is how you erase a father." She looked at me steadily. "If you want to understand what's really happening in your house, don't just ask what Rachel is doing. Ask who did this to her first." I drove home that night with the first crack of a much older, much colder picture beginning to surface in the developer of my mind. And 2 days later, my sister called back with a court filing notice she'd found. A petition Rachel's attorney had already drafted with a hearing date stamped on it. 6 weeks away. The 6 weeks did something useful to me. It took the grief that had been drowning me and pressed it down into something harder and more focused. Grief is a flood. A deadline is a channel. I still cried. I cried in that dark room more nights than I'll admit. But between the crying, I did what my whole life had trained me to do. I gathered the picture, frame by frame, and I refused to look away from any of it. Claire and Dr. Okafor and I spent the next 10 days assembling it together, and Dr. Okafor's question kept turning in me like a key in a stiff lock. Ask who did this to her first. So I started, for the first time in 23 years, actually looking at where Rachel had come from. I'd always known the broad strokes. Rachel's parents divorced when she was small. She'd been raised by her mother, Lorraine, and she almost never spoke about her father, a man named Walt, who'd died when Emma was a baby. In all our years together, Rachel had described him in exactly 3 words, always the same 3, delivered with a little shiver. He wasn't safe. I'd never questioned it. Why would I? But now I called Rachel's aunt, Lorraine's estranged sister, a woman Rachel had cut out of our lives years ago over some fight I'd never understood. And I asked her, plainly, what Walt had really been like. There was a long silence on the line, the kind I was learning to recognize as the sound of a buried truth deciding whether to come up. "Walt was a gentle man," she said finally. "A quiet, gentle man who adored that little girl. And Lorraine spent Rachel's entire childhood convincing her he was a monster. Poisoned her against him drop by drop, until Rachel wouldn't take his calls, wouldn't see him, sent his birthday cards back unopened. He died in a hospital in Toledo with a stack of returned letters in his nightstand, still asking the nurses if his daughter had come. She never came. She believed, right up until he was in the ground, that she protected herself from a dangerous man." The aunt's voice broke. "The tragedy of Rachel is that she got out of that house never knowing she'd been lied to. She just learned the shape of it. She learned that this is what mothers do." I had to pull the car over, because there it was, the oldest negative in the whole box, the original image every later copy had been printed from. Rachel wasn't inventing cruelty out of nothing. She was doing to Emma the exact thing that had been done to her, with the exact same words, "He isn't safe," passed down from Lorraine like a family heirloom, mother to daughter to granddaughter, a wound learning to reproduce itself. And Lorraine, I would learn, was not a distant figure in this at all. She and Rachel spoke every single day. It was Lorraine's handwriting, Dr. Okafor would later determine, on the coaching notes tucked into that folder. Lorraine was not a bystander to what happened to my daughter. She was the architect. She had simply built it twice. I want to be careful here, the way Dr. Okafor was careful with me, because this is the part that complicated everything. Understanding where Rachel learned it did not excuse a single thing she did. She was not a child anymore. She was a grown woman, a nurse, someone who spent her days protecting other people's children, and she made a choice. Thousands of small choices over 10 years to do to her own daughter the thing that had crippled her own life. But it did change the picture from a simple one into an honest one. And I've learned that the honest pictures are almost always the complicated ones. Then Claire found the last piece, and the last piece was the one that took me to my knees. His name was Grant. In our house, for as long as Emma could remember, he had been Uncle Grant, a warm, easy, divorced man Rachel had known since nursing school, the guy who showed up at Emma's recitals and birthdays, who always had a gift, who Rachel always described as such a good friend to this family. I'd liked him. God help me, I had liked him. And buried in Rachel's emails, going back the better part of 8 years, was the truth of what Grant actually was. Not, as far as I could ever prove, a full-blown affair in the way you'd picture it. Something colder and more deliberate than that. A partnership. A plan. Emails between Rachel and Grant and Rachel and Lorraine laying out a future in patient detail. A future where I was gone, where the marriage was dissolved on the strength of that fabricated record, where I was legally kept at arm's length as a danger, and where Grant, the safe one, the gentle one, would step quietly into the space where a father used to stand. And I understood then why one of Emma's letters had a line in it I hadn't been able to make sense of. I'd read it a dozen times up in that attic. Grant is the only man who's never scared me. I get why Mum trusts him. They hadn't just been erasing me. They'd been installing my replacement in real time for years, while I photographed strangers' weddings and told myself my family was fine. But it was the very last document that Dr. Okafor flagged that I will carry to my grave. Tucked into Rachel's folder, ready for the hearing 6 weeks out, was a typed statement. A page and a half, formatted like a legal declaration, written in the first person. It was a child's account of years of fear and mistreatment at the hands of her father. And it was signed, at the bottom, Emma Bennett. Dr. Okafor laid it beside 3 genuine samples of my daughter's writing: a school essay, a birthday card, a page from those unsent letters. And she didn't even need to explain it. The vocabulary was wrong. The sentence structure was an adult's. The specific incidents matched the dates in Rachel's log. Not any memory a real girl would phrase that way. My 16-year-old daughter did not write that statement about her own father. It had been composed for her, in her name, in her voice, to be handed to a judge. The single most damning piece of evidence against me, the document meant to sever me from my child forever. My little girl hadn't even written it. They'd put the words in her mouth, and they were 6 weeks from putting them in front of a judge. We did not confront Rachel right away, and I want to explain why, because everything in me wanted to. Every night I sat across the dinner table from her, watching her ask about my day in that soft voice, watching her text under the table, to Grant, I now knew, or to Lorraine. And everything in my body screamed to stand up and throw the whole folder in her face. Dr. Okafor and David Reyes, the family attorney they'd brought in, would not let me. "The moment she knows you know," David said. "She can burn the evidence, coach Emma harder, or file first, and paint you as the unstable one who snapped when confronted. Right now you have something almost no alienated parent ever gets. You have the proof, and you have surprise. Don't spend surprise on a single satisfying moment. Spend it on your daughter." So for 10 more days, I lived the strangest life of my whole existence. Sleeping beside a woman I was quietly dismantling, memorizing her face across the breakfast table the way you memorize a photograph of someone already gone. It felt like grieving a person who kept passing me the coffee. Some mornings I almost forgot for a few soft seconds and loved her out of pure habit. And then the memory would drop back over me like a dark room curtain, and the light would go red, and everything true would come back up. David worked fast and quietly. He filed a preemptive request for an independent custody evaluation and a psychological assessment of Emma by a neutral, court-appointed expert, not Dr. Okafor, someone with no connection to any of us, which was the single most important move in the entire case, because it took the question of Emma's welfare out of Rachel's carefully built narrative and put it in front of a stranger who owed nobody anything. He documented my clean record, my steady 30-year business, the character statements that came pouring in the moment Claire started making calls. Quietly, without Rachel ever knowing, the foundation she'd spent a decade pouring began to crack from underneath. And when it was ready, we chose a Sunday. We arranged for Emma to spend the weekend at a friend's house. I insisted on that, absolutely refused to do this anywhere near her. And Rachel believed she was coming home from her shift to a normal, quiet evening. Instead, she walked into our living room and found me sitting in my chair, Claire beside me on the couch, David Reyes in the armchair with a leather folder on his knees, and Dr. Okafor standing quietly near the doorway to the kitchen, where the light was. I watched Rachel understand it in stages. First, her face did the automatic warm thing, the hostess reflex. "Oh, Claire, what a surprise." Then she saw the folder on the coffee table where the Sunday paper usually sat, a plain manila folder, and I watched the color go out of her from the top down, like an image fading off a print left too long in the sun. She knew that folder. She'd built its contents with her own hands. "Sit down, Rachel," I said. My voice came out level, which surprised even me. "It's time somebody in this family told the truth. All of it. No more keepsake boxes." She sat. She was good, I'll give her that, and I say it without warmth. For a full minute she tried denial, a bright, brittle bafflement. "Michael, I don't know what any of this is about. You're scaring me." And then David opened his folder and slid one page across the coffee table. And it was the log, her handwriting, her dates. And the bafflement drained away, and something older and harder took its place. "He wasn't a good father," she said, and her voice had changed entirely. Flat now, certain, almost reciting. "I was protecting Emma. Somebody had to protect her from..." "From what?" I said. "Say the incident, Rachel. Pick any one off your list. March 12th. Say what I did on March 12th. She couldn't, of course, because nothing had happened on March 12th, or any of the days, and we both knew it. And for the first time in 10 years, there were witnesses in the room who knew it too." "It was Grant's idea to keep records," she said finally, quietly. And there it was, the reflex to hand the knife to someone else. "And my mother's. Mom said I had to have documentation, that men like you always..." "Rachel." I leaned forward, and I said the thing I'd driven 100 miles of dark road rehearsing. The thing I needed her to hear more than anything I'd ever said to her. "Your father wasn't a monster, either." The room went completely silent. "Walt was a gentleman who died in a hospital in Toledo asking if you'd come. You never came, because Lorraine spent your whole childhood telling you he wasn't safe. She did to you exactly what you've spent 10 years doing to Emma. The same words. He isn't safe. You're not protecting our daughter from a monster, Rachel. You're building her the exact childhood that broke you. And she is going to grow up and find out, the way you never got to, that the man she was taught to fear loved her the whole time. I have photographed a lot of human faces. I have never seen one come apart the way hers did. It wasn't the performance I'd braced for. It was worse. It was real. A decade of certainty collapsing at once, the ground of her own history opening under her feet. She started to say Grant's name, reaching for the man who'd helped her plan all of it, and Dr. Okafor spoke gently from the doorway. "He stopped answering an hour ago, Rachel. My colleague reached out to him this afternoon as a courtesy. Men like Grant tend to disappear the moment the plan stops being clean and starts being a case." Which was the truth. Grant was already gone. His number changed within the week, his warmth for our family evaporating the instant it carried legal weight, exactly the way Dr. Okafor had told me it would. He'd never loved any of us. We had been a project. "I'm not doing this out of revenge," I said, standing. "I need you to understand that, because it's the only thing I'm sure of. I'm doing it to drag the truth into the light, so that our daughter finally gets to decide what's real with her own eyes, instead of the version you and your mother developed for her in the dark. I can't stay married to you, but I'm not going to erase you the way you tried to erase me. Emma's lost enough parents to lies already." It's been almost 5 months now since that Sunday, and I want to be honest with you about how it actually went, because I think you've earned the truth, instead of the version that would make you feel better. This is the part where I'm supposed to tell you my daughter ran into my arms, and 10 years melted away. That's not what happened. That's not how any of this works. And I'd be doing you a disservice to pretend it is. I live in a small house now, about 20 minutes from the old one, with my darkroom set up in what's meant to be the second bedroom. The court process moved the way David promised it would. The independent evaluator, the neutral stranger who owed none of us anything, spent weeks with Emma and with all of us, and her report was quietly devastating to everything Rachel had built. She found no evidence of any danger from me, ever. She found, instead, clear signs of a child who had been systematically taught to fear a parent. And she used that word in her report, alienation. The petition Rachel's attorney had drafted, the one stamped with a hearing date, never saw a courtroom. It simply dissolved the way a print dissolves when you finally get the chemistry right, and wash the lies away. But here's the bitter thing, the thing no court order can fix. You cannot undevelop a photograph. 10 years of fear does not lift off a 16-year-old girl because a judge signs a page. When Emma first learned the truth, she didn't run to me. She got angry. At Rachel, yes, but at me too. At all of us. At a world where the two people who were supposed to anchor her reality had turned it into a place she couldn't trust. For weeks, she didn't want to see me at all. Some days, she still doesn't. We do reunification therapy now, Emma and I, in a gentle beige office with a therapist who reminds me a little of Dr. Okafor. And it is the slowest, humblest work I have ever done. Slower than any print I ever coaxed up out of the dark. Some sessions we manage to laugh. Some sessions she just cries, and I sit with her and don't reach for her. Because reaching too fast is a thing she's still healing from. I'm learning, at 51, how to be near my own daughter without frightening the frightened part of her. It is the hardest and most sacred thing I have ever done. Rachel and I are divorced. She's in counseling, which I didn't ask for and can't take credit for. I don't hate her, and I've stopped waiting for the clean, satisfying justice some part of me wanted. Life rarely hands you that. She wasn't only a villain. She was a little girl once, too, standing at a hospital door she'd been taught never to walk through. And she grew up and built that same door for her own child, without ever once seeing what she was doing. That doesn't excuse her. It just makes it true. Lorraine is gone from our lives entirely, unrepentant to the last, still certain she'd protected everyone. Grant vanished so completely it's as if he was never real, which, in every way that counts, he wasn't. If you're still with me, let me leave you with what this cost me the ability to unsee. The first thing is this. Turning a child against a loving parent is not drama, and it is not just a phase, and it is not one parent being petty in a divorce. When it's deliberate and sustained, it is a form of child abuse, and the child is always the one who bleeds the most. If you are watching it happen, to a friend, a brother, a father, yourself, believe your eyes before you believe the gentle voice explaining it all away. The second thing, when someone who loves you tries to hand you a hard truth, do not punish them for the weight of it. I lost 3 years with my sister because believing her would have cost me a comfortable lie, and she turned out to be the only one who ever saw clearly. The people brave enough to tell you what you don't want to hear are very often the ones who love you most honestly. The third thing, and the one that haunts me, harm repeats itself when no one is willing to stand in the dark and look at it. Rachel became her mother because no one ever showed her the real picture of her own father. Wounds that aren't seen get handed down. Somebody, somewhere in every family, has to be the one who finally says, "This stops with me." And the last thing, if any of this sounds like your life, if you suspect a child is being turned against a parent, you are not powerless and you are not crazy. Document what you see calmly and consistently. Talk to a family therapist or a reunification specialist who understands this specific harm. Get a neutral, independent professional involved before you ever get near a courtroom. And hold on, because the truth is patient, and it keeps. I still develop my own prints. Old habit. Last week I was in my darkroom, rocking a tray under the red light, when I heard the mail slot, and among the bills was a small envelope in handwriting I have known since it was big and round and full of loops. My name was on the front. Just my name. Michael, it still said. Not Dad. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But this one wasn't hidden in a box in an attic. This one she had actually mailed. Inside was a single line. I don't know what's true yet, but I want to. Can we try again on Sunday? I stood there in the red dark, and I cried the way I hadn't let myself cry through any of it, holding one honest sentence from my daughter's own hand. And I understood something I should have understood 30 years ago. The image is always there. It's always been there, latent in the silver, the whole time. It just takes someone willing to stand in the dark long enough and love it steadily enough to bring the real one back. So tonight, before you sleep, I'm going to ask you to do one small thing. Think of the person in your life you've been told a story about. The estranged father, the difficult parent, the one who was quietly written out. And go find out for yourself what's true. Ask the question. Open the box. Make the call you've been avoiding. Because somewhere, someone may be sitting in the dark, still asking the nurses if you've come. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs it. And subscribe so we can keep telling the ones nobody else will. Stay kind, stay awake, and never, ever let someone else develop the truth for you.